Hey guys, Sean here. I'm down in Hong Kong, and today we'll be talking about a few more tips and tricks for working more effectively with Chinese companies. Specifically, today I'll be telling you about a concept I like to call China Speed, and I'll be telling you what it is, why you need to know about it, and how you can better adapt to this China Speed if you want to work more effectively with Chinese companies. So let's get into it. Now, most of us who have traveled abroad, who have lived abroad, or even generally pay attention to global news, we know that different countries have different cultures, and of course, different cultures have different ways of doing things. For example, when I was in business school, the classic case we looked at was something called Mañana Culture. Mañana meaning tomorrow in Spanish. And the case was that when American companies were expanding overseas to Mexico, Latin America, Southern Europe, they were often faced with a much different attitude among employees, a different work climate, whereas things were more relaxed, they were more slow. Companies would often take afternoon naps, and things could even be put off to the next day. And so, of course, these American companies, they were faced with various problems, both employee relations-wise as well as operations-wise, in terms of being able to have the two different cultures work together successfully, as well as to be able to meet deadlines jointly. Now, in China, in contrast, I've actually found the opposite to be the case, at least in certain sectors like technology. And what this means is that we actually have many companies working much faster, being much more devoted to pushing things forward than might be the case in Western organizations overall. And that's one reason I call it China Speed, is because oftentimes the China offices are moving much faster. They are committed to putting out so many more outputs and results. And therefore, if you have Western companies working with them as partners, or if you have Western employees coming on to these Chinese organizations, there definitely can be a culture clash in terms of how do you have these two sides work together that have very different expectations about how work should be done. And so again, that's why it's called China Speed, just because everyone is just working so much faster in the China offices. So, what exactly is China Speed? How do we define it? According to my own experience in the Chinese tech sector, there are about three things that stand out above all others. First is there is just a huge amount of work that these companies, that these employees, and especially the engineering teams are taking on. It's very common for companies to work more than the 5-day work week. I know when I was at Huawei previously, the last Saturday of every month was a designated working day, and I know that there are other tech companies, smaller tech companies, that will actually have a designated 6-day working week. It's simply how it works. Every single week you're working 6 days. Alibaba, I think, is a good example of that one. Second, there is an incredible drive among employees. It's not simply they have more work to do, but there is a very great drive among them to do more, to achieve more. And this can be the result of things like a very attractive incentive policy, monetary incentive policy. It could be very aggressive KPIs. It could be that employees very much believe in and support the mission of the company. And it could also be that they've been given this great opportunity by the company to rise above their station, so to speak, maybe come from a very poor area, and they want to pay back the company for this opportunity that's been given to them. Third, and which can be a little bit more difficult for Western employees to adapt to, is that Chinese tech companies have a very common practice of kind of playing fast and loose with the established rules, the established norms. I think somewhat similar to Facebook's practice I've heard of move fast and break things. And I think the important thing that I really want to emphasize here, and this is important because there's just so much anti-China rhetoric, both by governments, both by individuals, that when I say that they play fast and loose with the rules, this does not relate in any way to any malice on their part, any ill will. It's simply a result of them having to develop and build their businesses in the Chinese market, which is much less structured, which has been much more competitive. And so you simply have these practices develop in these companies that are less mature, but they're growing very fast, they're very big, and there simply hasn't been enough time to develop internal regulations, rules, structures, like you would have in big companies overseas like Microsoft, like Cisco. I mean, there simply hasn't been enough time, and so that does result in them somewhat flying by the seat of their pants. And it simply is something that the employees in the tech industry in China, myself included, have learned to adapt to this, have learned to kind of sit back and go with it, so to speak. But despite the fact that this China speed is certainly not maybe the norm in overseas markets, especially Western markets, I do think it does relate in some sense to the success that certain companies have been able to achieve overseas. Companies like Huawei, mobile phone giants like Xiaomi, like Oppo, they're very much Chinese companies, but they have had this internal drive that allowed them to first conquer the domestic markets and then to move into other areas overseas, whether it be Southeast Asia, whether it be Europe, and really to have a huge amount of success. And a large amount of this relates to the drive that their employees have been willing to put forward. And so while it's certainly acceptable, I think, to talk about the pros and cons of moving at China speed, especially in overseas and Western markets, it is a very important part of why some of these companies have been able to succeed overseas, because they have the drive to do better, to do more, to be faster than maybe their Western competitors. It can be very difficult for expatriates and other foreign workers and experts to adapt to China's speed. And one of the key reasons that I've observed is that most of these expatriates or experts that are working with Chinese organizations are those that have a lot of experience, a lot of industry experience, either in their home countries or in other Western markets. And what this leads to is them having a very strong preconceived notion of what the right way to do things is and what the wrong way to do things is. And the right way is almost always the Western way. And this type of mindset makes it very difficult for them to work effectively with Chinese teams, or even to take into consideration the Chinese point of view. In addition, adapting to the speed at which these Chinese organizations run at can be mentally exhausting for many. Not simply because of the massive workload that people sometimes face, though that is sometimes a factor, but it also relates to the mental stress and also the mental flexibility that is required to be working so fast in an environment where things are not set, where things might be constantly changing. And so many people, I think this is natural, most people that are coming into a new environment, they focus more on wanting to be in control. It helps them stay safe, it helps them stay sane. And if you're working with the Chinese organizations, as I mentioned before about China speed, you're often flying by the seat of your pants. And being unable to let go of that need for control can make it very, very physically and emotionally demanding, and it can make it very hard to adapt. Now, in my experience, what is one of the most important things if you want to be able to successfully adapt to work with a Chinese organization and to have a chance of adapting to this China speed, is that you have to understand what your true role is as a foreign worker, as an expatriate worker, either in a Chinese organization or working with a Chinese organization, say from your home country. And that is, your role is not to tell them that they're wrong. It's not to tell them what to do. Your role is to act as a bridge for them so that they can continue doing things in more of a Chinese way, but at the same time, you're going to be helping them to understand the way Western markets work, how things are done in overseas countries. And so you're educating them, you're helping them to learn, to adapt, but it is a Chinese organization and they're not going to stop being a Chinese organization. And so you can't want to do that. You can't be trying to force them to be something that they're not. And you have to be able to find the right balance and be able to make sure they understand that you are willing to walk on the same journey as they are, not simply stand on the sidelines and yell at them for being wrong as you see it. And second, if you really want to adapt, it's very important that you learn to let go. As I mentioned earlier, is that there's so many things you just can't control, and sometimes you just need to focus on getting stuff done. Sometimes you can't plan too far ahead. Sometimes you simply have to look at what the business needs are and you need to just get it done. You need to put your head down, bowl through it, and that's really something that happens a lot in Chinese organizations. You simply have to get those results through and then hope it works out, because sometimes you don't know. Sometimes the organization is moving so fast you can never really tell. But lastly, one thing I'll say is that really what it comes down to it is you want to be adding value to the organization. And there's always going to be a little bit of discomfort adapting to a new working style, but I think that for those that are willing to put preconceived notions aside, I think it's very rewarding, very interesting to work with Chinese organizations, but you do have to be willing to adapt. You do have to be willing to try out a different style. That's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about China speed and working effectively with Chinese organizations, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below, or you can send me a message on Twitter to SeanUM_China. If you're interested in learning more about China, the Chinese culture, as well as working and living in China, please feel free to follow my blog at ChinaCultureCorner.com, and I'd also appreciate it if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.